Thank you, Winston, for that very warm and heartfelt introduction. A few years ago, a coach friend of mine sent me a link to a TED Talk that completely changed the trajectory of my life. As I listened to Dr. Brené Brown's talks on vulnerability and shame, for the first time, I understood what this thing really was that had been the undercurrent of my entire life. This thing that had snuck into the driver's seat of my life and had me locked in the trunk, feeling trapped and helpless. Let me ask you this. How many of you wake up in some kind of scarcity each morning? Didn't get enough sleep, not thin enough, not smart enough, not promoted enough, not healthy enough, not lovable enough, not fill in the blanks enough. Well, that was my story for the first 40 plus years of my life. Being born in an authoritarian and patriarchal culture was probably not the ideal setting for my wildly free and independent spirit. And looking back, it was exactly the right setting for my life's work. I was the youngest of 3 and the only girl in the family. And so I grew up for the early years of my life feeling very, very scared and very, very alone. Everywhere I looked, there were messages of who, what, and how I should be, and who, what, and how I should not be. And so I learned very, very early in life that showing any kind of emotion was a sign of weakness, that asking to have my needs met was being self-indulgent, and that my imperfections were seen as inadequacies, something that I needed to work on diligently and correct. And so needless to say, I felt like I had no permission to fail or to make mistakes. And so from a very early age, I learned to hide my struggles in order to avoid the pain of shame, blame, criticism, and judgment. And I started to find comfort and safety in pretending and perfecting. But no matter how perfect I tried to be, I found I still could not control other people's perceptions of me. And I was continuously feeling disillusioned in myself, not feeling good enough, and certainly not feeling worthy of love and belonging. And so by the time I graduated from high school, one thing I had figured out was that good grades and any kind of academic, professional, or financial achievement would definitely raise my status in the eyes of those who really mattered, in the eyes of those who held the strings to my worthiness. And so even though I did understand that intellectually, it didn't change the fact that my heart was still looking for deeper connection. It was still looking to be loved and accepted just for who I was at my core, and not for what I did for other people or what I achieved. So this resulted in an early marriage, 2 beautiful children, and a growing sense of emptiness. To the outside world, my life couldn't have looked more perfect. But on the inside, I was slowly disintegrating. And so, in my married life, just as I had done in my childhood, I went into pleasing, pretending, perfecting, performing. And adding on academic achievements, convinced that a higher professional status would give me that sense of worthiness that I was craving for and I was longing for and hungry for. But sadly, that empty, hollow feeling inside of me was growing like weeds. That feeling of being in this world and yet being disconnected from it. And so after having tried every single trick that I knew, I came to the conclusion that there was something wrong with me, that I was broken, and that if only I could learn how to be a better wife, a better mother, then things would change and life would be happier for me. Well, I didn't achieve those goals, but what I did achieve was unimaginable levels of self-hatred and self-loathing. The price for which I paid through mind, body, and spirit. What was worse was that by this time, I could see history repeating itself. And I saw my children growing up with an emotionally absent mom. Now, as an educator, that realization hit me like a lightning bolt. And I immediately knew that something needed to change if I was going to break that cycle. But because I was so convinced that I was the problem, that there was something wrong with me, as a last resort, I turned to self-help books, looking for answers, which then led me on my path to spirituality, my saving grace. It took me 15 years of being on that path to understand that I had been in a codependent, emotionally disempowering marriage for 28 years. And that I had lost the most important gift that we have as human beings, which is my voice. And I also realized that what had been running my entire life was the shame of not feeling good enough, of always worrying about what other people thought about me, and comparing myself to others constantly and coming up short over and over again. By this time, I had hit rock bottom. And so, thanks to my highly resilient spirit, I decided that rock bottom was going to be the solid foundation that I was going to build my future on. I've often described myself as a rubber duck. It's like, you push me down here, I'll pop up here. You push me down here, I'll pop up here. Nothing's going to keep me down, and I'm not going to give up. So finally, I summoned the courage to leave my marriage. And simultaneously, I left a job that was also not in alignment with my values. And started to rebuild myself one brick at a time. But the only difference was this time, I was reconstructing myself from my heart and not my head. From a place of self-love and not self-loathing. And finally, for the first time, I learned how to exhale. So I spent the next few years learning how to treat myself with love and compassion, giving myself permission to be imperfect and embrace the beauty of my cracks. And I started to consciously surround myself with people who loved me, not for what I did for them or for what I achieved, but for who I was at my core. So you can only imagine my joy when I was introduced to Dr. Brené Brown's work. And I discovered that through her research, she had given language to my journey from pain to purpose, from scarcity to feeling good enough. And most importantly, what I learned from her research was that love and belonging are fundamental, non-negotiable needs of all human beings. It is not something that we need to hustle for. We're born worthy of love and belonging. Not if, not when, now. Worthy now. Period. And so then that started me on the next chapter of my life and the desire to pay it forward by becoming a certified facilitator for her work. And so now, each time I facilitate a retreat, there is a part of me that heals from witnessing the process of people taking their lives back, of stepping into the arena and making brave and courageous choices, and choosing to live a more authentic life. It's become the most meaningful way for me to make sense of all the pain and struggle that I endured for over 40 years of my life. This work has really connected me to my purpose, which is to coach people to focus less on what other people think about you and more on how you feel being around them. To start treating yourself with more love and compassion. And to, first and foremost, start owning your truth. And then be vulnerable enough to share it and speak it with others and ask for what you need. And most importantly, to love yourself over and above everyone else. I can hear my grandmother turning in her grave, listening to my words. No, but really, contrary to how many of us have been raised, loving yourself is not an act of selfishness. We can't give to others what we can't give to ourselves first. Now, if you want to be the best parent, the best partner, the best friend, the best leader, the best fill in the blanks in the myriad of hats that you wear every single day, it all has to start with being kinder and more loving to yourself first. As Brené says, our sense of belonging can never be greater than our sense of self-acceptance, which means having compassion for our imperfections, which means having the courage to step into the arena and try something new, even if it means falling, even if it means failing, even if it means getting disappointed or having our heart broken. Why? Because over time you have learned how to get up and try again. Right? And so my invitation to all of you in here and all of you out there is to start showing up for yourself and for your dreams every single day. And start leaning into others for support. Perfectionism and being very, very self-creative and relying just on yourself are not the feathers that you want in your cap. And most of all, give permission to those around you to get close to your beautiful, true, imperfect self. Because that's when the magic happens. When we can move from our heads to our hearts. It's the shortest distance in our bodies and the longest journey that we will probably ever take in our lives. Thank you for sharing my time.
Thank you. Anita Anand, everyone.